Midnight off Luzon. A 20-year-old sonar man grips his headphones and whispers. Contact bearing 225. Range closing. While the destroyer escort Ulvert M. Moore, DE 442, knifes through black water, the captain says, "Stand by Hedgehog." A basket of contact, fused bombs leaves the rails in a rising hiss. 15 seconds stretch into forever. Then the ocean blinks white geysers and the terrible crack of a hull breaking. Silence. That is how Americans turned science into fate. Radar found the shadow. Sonar held it, and a forward-throwing mortar reached out where depth charges could not. Young sailors made it work because training had burned the steps into muscle memory and because the nation behind them had built tools that never quit. Shortly after midnight on 1 February 1945, an enemy submarine stopped answering orders and never sent another signal. We built that moment in factories that ran around the clock. Gulf Coast yards turned out destroyer escorts in months, welding steel with the speed of a free people in a hurry. Men and women new to ship work hit tolerances good enough for war. The sailors were young, but the system behind them was old and tough. Discipline on the bridge, innovation in the lab, parts at the pier. The enemy could not see us in the black water, but our instruments could see through the dark. One rescued Japanese seaman later said, "We heard nothing until the sea erupted." That line belongs in your bones. American industry, science, and quiet courage came together, and a convoy lane to Luzon stayed open for the troops who had to get there. The men on the escort did not cheer. They logged the data, circled for survivors, and pressed on. And here is the holy shit truth. Within 2 weeks, another American boat would kill 3 submarines in 76 hours, proving the night was ours. Another truth. Our submarine force made up roughly 2% of the Navy, yet it would go on to sink more than half of all Japanese. Merchant shipping lost in the war. Those are numbers, yes, but they are also names, saved soldiers who reached the beach, pilots who reached the carrier, families who saw letters come home. One sonar man counts to 15. A nation counts the lives it just protected. The bridge to the next revelation is simple. We did it again that spring in the Java Sea when a U.S. fleet boat stalked an unusual silhouette with German lines. That hunter was USS Besugo, and the prey was U-183. The lights were out. The torpedo tracks were straight. America proved that the Pacific belonged to free men with steady hands. Remember that sound. Black water, Java Sea, 23 April, 1945. Lookouts on the Balao-class USS Besugo, SS-321, catch a low deck and a sharp conning tower that do not match Japanese lines. The target is a German U-boat operating with Japan. Besugo slides in silent, tracks the zig, and looses a spread. One torpedo runs true. The strike blooms orange under the horizon. The submarine shudders, lifts, and goes down by the bow. Seconds later, only wreckage drifts in the swell. The crew does an American thing that sounds simple and is not. They surface in the dark and search for life. They find one man, torn and half-drowned, clinging to planking. He is brought aboard shivering and furious, then stunned by hot coffee and a blanket. A sailor writes in his notebook, "We fight hard, we do not hate." Another adds, "We sink the boat, but save the man." That is who we were on a night when another empire would have let the sea finish the job. The revelation lands with steel weight. Our boats did not just prowl, they owned the night because a free country fused tools and trust. Besugo carried radar to find, sonar to hold, and the fire control to place a warhead where it mattered. The ship had left Mare Island with fresh overhauls, new electronics, and a crew drilled to the minute. Back home, factories kept the pipeline full spares, batteries, fuel, and torpedoes, so a pont skipper could attack again tomorrow without waiting for miracles. That system, not luck, put a German submarine on the bottom in the Java Sea. Think about what the enemy learned in that moment. A partner of Japan, built by Europe's most feared submarine arm, could not hide in the Pacific night. The boat wore new paint and sailed strange waters. It did not matter. American instruments reached farther, and American judgment was faster. The man Besugo rescued would live to tell others that the hunters who destroyed his ship treated him like a human being. He could describe the smell of coffee and diesel, the low talk on a steel deck, and the quiet efficiency of a crew that knew exactly what to do. The bridge to the next chapter is a question asked in every wardroom that spring. Who really sank RO-115, the Japanese submarine that stopped answering orders off Luzon? The answer shows how wide our web had grown and how many hands were closing it at once. Follow the sonar pings back to a small ship with a big job, a destroyer escort that fought like a giant and did not miss when history gave it one clean shot. The ocean kept our secret that night. Night again, 31 January into 1 February 1945, off Luzon. A heavy cruiser passes a hard sonar contact to a smaller Guardian, Ulvert M. Moore, DE 442. The escort closes, screws thrumming, and fires a hedgehog pattern that hisses like a flock of angry bees. Nothing. A second run. Nothing. A third and a fourth. Still nothing. The bridge stays calm. The captain orders a fifth attack. The sea answers with one towering dome and the deep thud of a breaking pressure hull. Roiled water rolls back to flat. The contact never speaks again. Here is the problem the record had to solve. Did an American submarine make that kill, or did a humble escort do it? Post-war analysis, Japanese loss lists, and American logs converge on the same answer. RO-115 was almost certainly destroyed by DE 442 inches that midnight fight. That conclusion matters, because it reveals the shape of our victory. It was not one weapon or one hero. It was a web. Big ships hunted by radar and aircraft by day. Small ships guarded lanes at night and pounced when the ocean twitched. Submarines tied knots in the enemy's arteries, while destroyer escorts cut off the capillaries. The human thread holds the steel together. A radarman later remembered, "We kept the plot clean. We trusted the gear. We did not rush." And far away in Pearl Harbor, the fleet commander who built this culture spoke like a man planting fence posts in rock. "I am convinced that every leader entrusted with the safety of his country finds faith in God, the ultimate inspiration for victory," Admiral Chester W. Nimitz said. That quiet creed gave 19-year-olds clarity at 0200 when a bad call could cost a ship. For the enemy, the shock was brutal and simple. A submarine that left port with orders and hope vanished without a flare, a message, or a survivor. Staff officers in Manila waited for acknowledgements that never came. By 1945, our escorts had modern sonar, better training, and the hedgehog contact fused and deadly, so diving did not save you, and sprinting on the surface only made you easier to read. A Japanese petty officer told a POW debrief, "When you hunted at night, we felt you were already on the bridge with us." Bridge to the next beat. If a small ship could erase a submarine, what could a single American boat do in open water with radar on, batteries charged, and a captain who refused to be tired? The answer came in 3 violent midnights in the Babuyan Channel, when USS Batfish used the enemy's own radar like a lantern and wrote herself into history. The ocean kept no secrets from us. 10 February 1945, Babuyan Channel. USS Batfish, SS 310, runs the night air with decks awash, radar sweeping. Her radar detector pricks up first a thin electric whisper that means the enemy is pinging. The hunter turns toward the sound. The enemy makes himself. Contact, bearing steady, range closing, the first spread misses. The captain breathes once and attacks again. Metal tears underwater, a low rumble rolls through the hull. 1 down. 12 February. Another signal in the black wash. Same play. Close fast. Fire clean. Breaking up noises drift up like a death rattle through the frames. 13 February. A third contact, a third chase, a third kill. 3 submarines in 76 hours. That number is not legend, it is logged. Here is why it happened. Batfish had tools more advanced than anything fielded by the Axis in those waters, reliable surface, search radar, and a detector that turned enemy emissions into a beacon. She had charts marked by people who broke codes and read traffic. She had a crew trained to press after a miss, adjust, and fire again without panic. The human edge is the sharpest. A torpedoman wrote home, "Skipper says patience is a weapon. We all believe him now." Another sailor, soaked to the waist, told a buddy, "I could smell the hot oil when she went under." That kind of detail lives because American training gave them time to notice, while American industry gave them machines that did not quit. And when the sea went quiet, Batfish still circled for survivors, still scanned for life rings, because rules mattered even when no one could see. Across the table, the enemy felt the math closing. Radar meant the surface was a trap. Diving meant sonar kept you pinned. Speed meant a bigger wake on our scope. Officers who had been told that night favored the hunter now saw night favoring the American. A Japanese survivor in a later debrief said, "We surfaced to charge and felt watched. Bridge to the larger truth. One boat could dominate a sea lane for nights because a free nation had turned laboratories, factories, and classrooms into a kill web." The next chapters widen the camera how leadership made this culture, how a tiny force did the heavy lifting, and why the enemy arteries ran dry even while their armies still fought on land. On those 3 nights, the watch logged bearings, ranges, and the dull thumps of detonation with the care of surgeons. The after-battery reeked of ozone and sweat. The bridge tasted of salt and cordite. When they came back in, the citation would say what the crew already knew, that persistence married to superior instruments can change a map. The presidential unit citation followed, but the real reward was simpler. Convoys moved that would have died without them, and the empire that started the war felt its last safe hours at sea vanish. Batfish did not brag. She kept hunting. Hawaii, wartime dusk, the air smells of salt and hot asphalt, and a tall Texan studies a clean map with dirty hands. Chester W. Nimitz does not pound the table. He writes notes in a small, neat hand and tells young officers what he expects. Calm, readiness, and truth. He speaks once, and the room steadies. "I am convinced that every leader entrusted with the safety of his country finds faith in God the ultimate inspiration for victory," he says. That line is not theatre. It is the spine of a fleet that must win at night and far from home. What did that faith look like in steel? It looked like the patience to fix torpedoes that ran wrong, the humility to change tactics after early mistakes, and the courage to put radar and sonar into the hands of kids from Kansas and Queens. It looked like a logistics river that never ran dry tenders, tankers, ammo ships, so a destroyer escort that fought hard at midnight could rearm by morning. It looked like training that demanded a second attack after a miss and a third after that. It looked like a doctrine that said, "Save the enemy sailor if you can, because we are Americans, and that is our law." Nimitz built a culture where data mattered and character mattered more. The Submarine Force Pacific pored over patrol reports and squeezed lessons from each page. Destroyer escort divisions drilled hedgehog runs until the timing felt like a heartbeat. Carriers flew night radar patrols that stitched air and sea into one picture. Rear Admiral E.M. Eller later wrote a simple sentence that tells the whole story. Supremacy at sea was fundamental in all operations. That supremacy did not arrive as a gift. It was engineered. Listen to voices from the deck plates. A sonar operator after Luzon. "We kept our heads. The gear worked. The ocean talked." A Besugo quartermaster after the U-180. 3 action. "We did our job, then pulled a man from the sea." A Batfish torpedoman after the 3rd sinking. "Missed first. Hit second. Pressed third. That's all." Each line is short because war compresses language. Each line shows what Nimitz wanted. Quiet competence under pressure. The enemy felt that competence as a weight. Staffs in Tokyo and Manila found their plots emptying of ships. Captains who had once owned the night now feared it. The more the Americans refined their craft, the fewer choices the enemy had. And that is the bridge to the next chapter's thunderclap. How could a force that was only about 2% of the Navy strangle an empire's sea lifelines and help end a world war? The answer is a number that looks impossible until you read the patrol reports. Start with the math that makes you sit up. America's submariners were roughly 2% of the Navy, yet they sank about 55% of all Japanese merchant shipping lost in the war, more than 4.7 million tons plus hundreds of warships. That is not a slogan. That is a nation turning science, industry, and training into leverage. A Besugo-class boat weighed about 1,500 tons surfaced and carried a crew of 80 to 90 men. Multiply that by a few dozen boats on station, month after month, and you have a vice that tightens without rest. What did this look like at sea level? It looked like a sonar trace held steady in a rolling night, a target angle solved under red light, and an attack made cold after a miss. It looked like a radar plotter printing a thin line on a damp chart, a quartermaster whispering ranges, and a captain waiting for the last degree before he said, "Fire." It looked like batteries topped off by tender crews who handed over parts before a skipper finished asking. It looked like ships built and rebuilt in West Coast yards so fast that a damaged boat could be hunting again, while the enemy was still telling families their sailors would not be coming home. Now, look from the enemy's side. The Empire's factories needed ore, oil, and rubber. Those lifelines ran by sea. Our submarines found the arteries and cut them one convoy at a time. By 1945, Japanese shipping charts were gaps joined by guesswork. Captains ran at night, hugged coasts, and still vanished. A merchant sailor later told a debrief team, "We watched the sky by day and feared the water by night." That sentence explains collapse. The human cost was real and owned. 52 American submarines did not come back. More than 3,500 men did not see peace. They paid so that soldiers on Saipan, Peleliu, Leyte, and Okinawa could be supplied and reinforced while the enemy starved. The measure of that sacrifice is not only graves, it is also the lives saved by ships that did not sink and armies that did not get fed. Even our prisoners told the story. A Japanese officer captured after his ship went down said quietly, "Your small force hurt us more than fleets." He did not mean hurt like pride. He meant hunger. He meant factories with no coal and airfields with no fuel. Here is the punch you take forward. A tiny share of the Navy strangled an empire because a free people put better tools in better hands faster than any rival. The next step is to show how those hands built a kill web from factories to bridges to conning towers, so even the night had American rules, and our enemies learned them the hard way. A welder in Houston strikes an arc, and the night lights up blue. The keel ahead of her belongs to a destroyer escort that will steam as Ulvert M. Moore, DE 442, the same kind of ship that will stalk a contact off Luzon and end a submarine in the black. Brown shipbuilding turns out hull after hull, proof that a free people can learn fast and build faster. Across the country, Kaiser yards lay Liberty ships side by side, 2,710 in all, so convoys leave before the paint dries. At Willow Run, a B-24 Liberator rolls off the line every 63 minutes, an airplane an hour, so the skies over the Pacific carry more pressure than any enemy can bear. Now picture what that speed means to sailors at sea. A Besugo-class boat limps into a tender with a wounded periscope. The part is there, the crew swaps it, and the sub sails again before the enemy even updates his chart. A destroyer escort burns through hedgehog rounds in a midnight fight. By sunrise, she has more on deck, stacked like cordwood beside the depth charges. That rhythm is the hum in the cables and the confidence on the bridge. You attack because you know the next attack is possible. The numbers land like anchors. 563 destroyer escorts, thousands of radar sets, each one turning night into daylight on a scope. Fuel, torpedoes, batteries, food, mountains of it moving by rail and sea in a choreography only a continent-sized democracy could fund and maintain. Vice Admiral Charles A. Lockwood would later say, We shall never forget that it was our submarines that held the lines against the enemy, while our fleets replaced losses and repaired wounds. He could say it because factories made it true, welding steel into time and time into victory. The enemy felt the new math the hard way. A convoy planned in Tokyo was already known to US or codebreakers. A hull launched in Houston was already hunting in Luzon waters. Captains who once believed the Pacific's size favored them found the ocean getting smaller each month, stitched with radar beams and patrolled by ships born yesterday. A Japanese officer taken prisoner after his freighter went down muttered, "You build ships like we boil rice." He meant speed. He meant certainty. Here is the punch that carries forward. America did not just send men. America sent a system. Shipyards turned paychecks into keels. Labs turned equations into radar echoes. Farms turned corn into calories for crews who never slept. The result was simple to say, and impossible to beat: a hunter always ready for one more run. A torpedo wakes the sea. Besugo's target heaves, burns, and dies. In the wreckage, one man floats, burned and choking. The American submarine surfaces anyway. Lines go over. Strong arms haul him in. Someone shoves a mug into shaking hands. The air tastes of diesel and hot metal. That choice in the dark: sink the boat, save the man, tells you who we were. We were ruthless against machines and careful with souls. We killed to win and rescued to remain ourselves. That code starts high, but it lives low. Admiral Chester W. Nimitz speaks calmly in wartime Hawaii of faith, duty, and truth, and a 19-year-old quartermaster in the Java Sea translates it into action. We take him aboard. The suspicion fades when the blanket settles. The prisoner coughs, then whispers, "Water." He drinks. The crew goes back to stations. On American ships, rules mattered in the blind hours as much as at noon parade. You log the kill. You call for survivors. You leave the ocean better than you found it, even in war. This wasn't softness. It was strength. Men who know who they are press closer in the fight. They believe their equipment works and their country stands behind them, so they take risks others won't. Hedgehog patterns fired on contact. SJ radar read the sea skin like Braille. HF, divided by DF sets and traffic analysis, nudged a conning tower toward the interception point. When the shot came, American crews stayed cool because mercy and mastery both lived in the same heart. The enemy noticed. Debriefed survivors spoke of Americans who fought like steelworkers and then acted like neighbors. One Japanese sailor said, "You killed our ship but gave me life." Word like that travels through a fleet. It breaks something. If the enemy can afford compassion, he is not desperate. If he can lift a foe from the water tonight, he can find your convoy tomorrow. Kindness became a form of pressure. Plenty became a weapon. Here is the bridge to the next truth. Even as Americans kept their code, they tightened the noose. Japan tried to adapt: more escorts, coastal hugging, radio silence, but the ocean had American rules now. Night attacks grew sharper. Convoys shrank to strings of targets. The question that follows is harsh and fair. Could Japan change fast enough to keep its lifelines open against a hunter that built ships like we built barns and treated prisoners like future neighbors? A staff officer pins new convoy routes to a Tokyo wall. The lines hug coasts, dodge airfields, and sneak through straits. Escorts are added. Orders tightened, radios hushed. On paper, it looks clever. At sea, it looks late. American submarines already own the angles. Radar catches the surface charge at night. Sonar holds the deep sprint by day. The new plan bleeds in the same old places. The problem was gravity. Japan's industry ran on iron, coal, and oil that moved by ship. Before the war, merchant tonnage stood in the millions. By 1945, that fleet had fallen to a starving remnant, the bloodstream cut by torpedo and mine. Every convoy Japan added, America hunted with better tools. A Gato, or Balau-class submarine, read a radar whisper, slid into darkness, and fired spreads that turned charts into question marks. Destroyer escorts like DE-442 patrolled the lanes that fed our landings and punished any wolf that dared approach. Listen to the enemy's breath catch. We surfaced to charge and felt watched. One survivor said. Another wrote, "We changed routes and still met you." There is dignity in those lines. They were brave men on hard duty. But courage alone cannot rewire physics. If your tankers are fewer and slower, if your escorts burn fuel you cannot spare, if your factories wait on ore that never arrives, you are not adapting, you are shrinking. Americans felt the shift in nightly details. More masts on the scope meant small convoys broken up to confuse the hunt. More singletons meant easier kills. Japanese destroyers that once charged boldly now patrolled nervously, throwing depth charges into empty water to keep their own fear down. Meanwhile, our side replaced losses and raised standards. Fire control sharpened. Torpedo reliability improved. Intelligence merged with doctrine so that a message decrypted at noon steered a periscope at midnight. Here is the revelation that hurts to read and matters to say. By early 1945, adaptation could not outrun arithmetic. Merchant tonnage lost could not be rebuilt. Routes closed faster than new ones opened. The Empire could slide pins on maps but not move fuel to guns. The bridge to the next chapter is the mechanism of that squeeze, a kill web built by free minds, where aircraft, escorts, and submarines shared a picture and took turns at the throat. When a nation can choreograph the ocean, the clock starts to count down for anyone who sails against it. Dawn on a carrier deck, a patrol plane lifts and vanishes into grey. Dusk on a destroyer escort. Sonar pings stitch a rhythm under the bow. Midnight on a submarine. A radar sweep writes a thin line on a damp chart. 3 hours, 3 platforms, 1 battle. That is how a republic fights when its labs, schools, and shipyards are welded to its fleets. The pieces are simple to name and deadly together. Ultra-level traffic analysis and HF divided by DF give a square of ocean a red outline. Patrol aircraft sweep it by day, marking contacts and pushing targets into predictable lanes. At sundown, destroyer escorts and picket ships take the watch, hedgehog rails ready, depth charges set. At midnight, the submarines come, decks awash, SJ radar searching the black water while the detector listens for an enemy's own pulse. The man on the periscope sees just a smear of light. The man on the TDC feeds in range, angle, and speed. The captain says, "Fire." The web closes from 3 directions. None of this works without the American habit of trust. The plane trusts the codebreakers. The escort trusts the pilot's plot. The submarine trusts a destroyer captain he has never met to hold the wolf pack at arm's length while he stalks the convoy's soft ribs. That trust lets people be brave without being reckless. It turns individual skill into system shock. A single radar return becomes a dead freighter. A single decrypted message becomes a lost month for an enemy army waiting on fuel. The enemy learned to dread the timing. Daylight drove them down. Darkness lured them up into beams. Speed on the surface made radar love them. Silence on the radio made traffic analysts suspicious. A Japanese officer captured in 1945 summarized it like a man closing a ledger. "You owned our roads." He meant the sea lanes, the only roads that mattered across an island empire. He meant a network he could not see and could not break. Here is the punch that leads you to the climax. When the web tightens, legends are born. Besugo's Mercy in the Java Sea and Moore's Midnight Hedgehog Strike fit into this picture. So does Batfish's run of 3 submarines in 76 hours. A demonstration that one boat inside a great web can be a hammer all by itself. The next chapter dives into those 3 nights, not as a list of kills, but as a lesson in how patience, tech, and nerve fuse into history. 10 February 1000, 945, Babuyan Channel. The sea is wine dark, and the air tastes of salt and battery acid. Lieutenant Commander John K. Fife stands quiet on Batfish's bridge, decks awash, spray freezing on faces. The radar detector whispers first, a faint, repeating tick that says the enemy's own set is running. The plot is steady, the angle is good. The first spread misses, no one curses. Fife turns the boat, works the problem, and fires again. The hull below shivers as breaking up noises thrum through steel. One down, 12 February. Another tick in the dark. Same patience, same pressure. The crew has done this in drills until it feels like breath. Patience is a weapon, a torpedoman says to nobody. The spread goes, minutes stretch thin. Then the sea answers. 2 down, 13 February. The men are sore and giddy, but Fife's voice stays level. The third contact is craftier. He bobs, dives, and tries to play blind. Batfish does not blink. Fire. The ocean blooms. 3 submarines in 76 hours. A presidential unit citation will later put a frame around what their log already says in pencil. Hunted by the enemy's light, pressed after misses, killed clean. The human edge makes the numbers glow. A bridge lookout mutters, "I can smell hot oil," as the last wreck slides under. A radioman writes, "We heard the enemy before we saw him." A chief quietly checks torpedo tubes like a man blessing tools. This is American mastery. Not magic, not luck, but a long chain of choices made right in the dark. The boat circles for survivors, because that is the rule, and then slips to new water, because that is the job. Across the channel, fear hardens into policy. Japanese captains order shorter surface charges. Battery margins shrink. Crews sleep in life jackets. Everyone knows the new truth. Night is no longer safe. One survivor tells his debriefers later, "We surfaced, and the sky watched us." That line could be poetry. It is logistics. When our boats can see you and reach you, and then see you again, your war ends by inches, and then all at once. Here is the carry to the finish. Those 3 nights are a human story and a national one. They prove what happens when a free country builds instruments that work and trusts calm men to use them. The last chapter sets the ledger down. Tonnage sunk, boats lost, lives spent, an empire starved. The math feels impossible until you remember the faces on Batfish's bridge. Start with the names carved in bronze. 52 American submarines did not come home. More than 3,500 sailors gave everything they had. Their branch carried the highest casualty rate in our Navy, and they carried it without complaint. Now set the ledger on the table. Those same submariners, about 2% of the fleet, sank roughly 55% of all Japanese merchant shipping lost in the war, more than 4.7 million tons, and hundreds of warships besides. That is what victory looks like, when courage meets capacity. Look how the numbers touch Earth. A torpedo that runs true means a factory that got the alloy right, a school that taught a kid trigonometry, a tender crew that turned wrenches at midnight. A hedgehog pattern that finds a hull means a design board in a clean room and a welder in a noisy shed both did their jobs. A convoy that reaches later means Marines get shells at Peleliu, aviators get fuel at Ulithi, and the men on Okinawa drink water that arrived in steel cans from home. Statistics here are people, multiplied by trust. The enemy's ledger closes on a stark line. Merchant ships fall from millions of tons afloat to a starving remainder by 1945. Fuel does not reach airfields. Tanks do not reach beaches. Factories go cold. A Japanese merchant sailor later told his interviewers, "We were starving before we surrendered." He was not speaking in metaphor. He was remembering nights when the ocean felt like a trap with an American heartbeat. Listen once more to American voices. Rear Admiral E.M. Eller explains the whole war in a sentence. Supremacy at sea was fundamental in all operations. Admiral Nimitz speaks of faith and duty, and leaves it there. Vice Admiral Lockwood reminds us our submarines held the lines when the rest of the fleet licked wounds and grew stronger. None of these men brag. They state facts that feel like thunder because the truth is big enough to be simple. Now end where we began, at night, on a small bridge above a large ocean. A sonar man counts to 15 and hears history happen. A skipper fires and does not flinch. A crew rescues a stranger because that is what Americans do. and the world shifts. Holy hell, we did that. We built keels, trained kids, cracked codes, shared coffee, and strangled an empire without losing ourselves. That is supremacy at sea. That is a republic at war and still human.